It was exactly 21 years ago. I was rollerblading through these halls and I was just so excited about anthropology I had to go see my professor to find out more. So I find his office and I go in the door and there's a girl in there.
And I had scheduled this meeting with some dude came rollerblading into the room and I was like, who is this joker?
And now we have 3 kids. We built our first house in New Guinea. Or I should say, they built our first house in New Guinea. All of them. Hundreds of people delivered hand-chopped wood from miles around. The entire thing was built from local materials, except for the roof, and a few nails. I helped a little bit. After 2 months of work, it was ready. They gave us a warm welcome. One of the joys of anthropology is that you get to step outside of your own culture and see the world from a different point of view. We lived there together for a year, and by the time it was time to leave, they had given us a whole new way of seeing the world, and a lot of feelums. So after all these people did all this work to build this house with me, I wanted to pay them, so I went around and I tried to give people money. But this just offended them. Turned out they didn't want my money, they wanted my friendship. And this was the first glimpse I had into a really different way of seeing the world. What I came to understand is that for them, money is something that ends a relationship. And they don't want to end the relationship. When you do something for somebody or you give somebody a gift, it's like it ties a string between you. And you don't want money that essentially breaks the string. You want instead another gift to come back. And then that just like strengthens the string. Through a lifetime of giving, people end up weaving together the fabric of their society, much like the string bag itself. It creates a web of support and interdependence that ties everybody together. So let's get out of here and I'll tell you a story. I want to share with you the story of a really dear friend of mine. My wife and I moved to New Guinea in August, and for the first few months I hung out a lot with this guy Kodani. But in December he started getting sick. And it was really hard to watch because he'd been like this really active guy, always out, you know, working in the garden and playing, and to see him get sick was really hard. He started to, like his stomach got really distended and really big, and then his arms got really thin. He didn't really think about this the same way that you or I would. He didn't really think of himself as medically ill. He turned to ideas of witchcraft. What he thought had happened was that somebody had shot him with an invisible witchcraft arrow and it entered his stomach, and that's why his stomach was so swollen. And then this witch and all of these witches' friends were coming at night and actually eating his flesh, and that's why his arms were getting skinnier. How can we empathize with a perspective like that? How do we imagine our way into that worldview? This is where the art of seeing comes in. I'm just gonna leave those there. They'll be fine. It's a small town. Choices, 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 choices. So we're gonna eat like Kodani today. Lots of sweet potatoes. Yeah. Thanks. Have a good one. Thank you. So seeing big is all about seeing the really big picture stuff. All the things that brought these potatoes to me. The infrastructure, the social structure, as well as the beliefs, ideas, and values, and how they're all integrated together in a big system that brings me sweet potatoes for $1.29 a pound, and this is all I know about them. I don't know who grew them, I don't know who brought them here, I don't know who put them on the shelf. I just have a sweet potato and a receipt, and that's it. The big structures in New Guinea are very different. I think a really good metaphor in New Guinea would be the string bag itself. So this string bag is woven from a single piece of string that's taken from the bark of a tree. It's rolled together by a woman who then weaves it together for months and months before it becomes a string bag. When you're handed a string bag or you're handed a potato, you're told exactly where it came from, who made it, all the struggle they went through in making it, and you get this sense of strong connections to other people. You start to feel tied to them in the same way that the string bag is all woven together. You start to feel woven together with all the people around you. It gives you a sense of strong interdependence rather than independence. Our culture is all about choices, and conveniences that give us a sense of independence and individualism. I spent my money to get this potato, it's my potato, and I cooked it myself, and now I'm going to eat it by myself in my office. Things look very different in the village. You sit around a fire for hours as the sweet potato cooks, sharing stories. The door is always open, and anybody who comes in gets to eat. As food is passed from hand to hand, the strings of social bonds are woven together like the mesh of the string bag. If you grew up here, your health is always dependent on having good relationships with others. So it makes sense that when your health fails, you might look to your web of relations to see which one has gone bad. Kodanim tells me that he thinks that he's been given a sweet potato at some point, but that when somebody gave him part of it, they kept the other part. And when they kept the other part, they took maybe a little piece of it and they maybe bundled it up and they worked witchcraft on it. And when they did that, everything that happened to this piece of sweet potato also happened to him. And this was confirmed for him by a shaman who did a seance, and this little bundle fell from the ceiling of the hut we were in. And he picked up the bundle and he said, "This is a piece of food that you have eaten." The witch has bundled it up and put it at the base of a tree. And what you're feeling digging into your side right now, digging into your stomach, is the roots of that tree digging into your body. Kodanim started thinking about all the wrongs he had done. He had stolen a pig from my father. He had stolen a chicken from Ona. He lied to Kenny. And he had a strained relationship with his in-laws. He approached my father first, who offered to do a ritual washing. My father placed his hands on soap and in cold water as a way of cooling the witchcraft. And then he poured water over Kodanim as he said a prayer. In his prayer, he said he would never want to harm Kodanim, that he was like a son to him. And the people standing around could feel the gravitas of the moment. Several teared up. 2 days later, there was a larger gathering. This one was to deal with the chicken he had stole from Ona, the lies he had told to Kenny, and his strained relationship with his in-laws. As these sins were outed, people stood up to offer their forgiveness. And at the end, a piece of soap was passed around to everybody so that everybody could touch it, and then Kodanim could be washed by the whole community. Of course, they'd hoped this would work, but 2 days later, he died. His death left a hole in the fabric of the world. His family came to my father asking for compensation. I was mad about this. I mean, Kodanim stole my father's pig, and now my father was supposed to pay them? It just doesn't fit with our sense of justice. If anything, Kodanim's family should owe my father compensation. I tried to stay out of it, but my family kept pressuring me to be involved. As I thought about what to do, I realized 3 simple truths. 1, I couldn't be like them. I just could not buy into the idea that witchcraft was real, that Kodanim had been shot with an invisible witchcraft arrow and that he'd been eaten alive by witches in the night. On the other hand, I also realized I couldn't just be true to myself. To be true to yourself in a situation like this is to shut yourself off from real learning, to understand their point of view. I needed something. I needed some set of tools that could help me through it. So I turned to the anthropological toolkit: communication, empathy, and thoughtfulness. I would have to communicate with them, try to see my way into their perspective, and use all the tools of thoughtfulness that I could to try to understand. One of the most important tools of anthropology is the holistic perspective. It's where you try to understand all the different pieces of culture as interconnected and see how they relate to one another. So for example, we can look at the infrastructure of their society and see that they are subsistence-based horticulturalists. It means that they live in these They live in these small villages scattered throughout the landscape with their gardens near their villages. This means that they have to keep their villages fairly small, or they end up walking very far to get to their gardens. At this level of social structure, we see that within each of these villages, they have their families, but they also have these sort of fictive kin relationships. They treat each other like family. They share food together and generally look after each other. But what happens when somebody dies is that there's going to be some tension. And often that tension runs across the family lines, so that one family will turn to the other family with suspicion. And in this case, where Codenim died, the suspicion goes over here toward my father. At this point, this group now has an option. They can move out, or they can pay the compensation, which will reunite the village. What's interesting is that when you look out over a landscape like this and you see all these villages, what you're looking at is a history of witchcraft accusations. People live spread out like this because of witchcraft accusations. So one way to think about this is that Codenim sees himself as made up of all of these relationships, and one of these relationships has become sick. When Codenim dies, it leaves a hole in the fabric, and there's a danger now that this witchcraft could spread, and that this hole needs to be filled. Codenim's family wants us to give a gift that will fill this hole and reconnect all of these strings that were broken when Codenim died. In the end, we decided to give that gift. The gift that would tie us all back together. It was a touching moment to see my father and Codenim's father, who had long thought of each other as brothers, come back together. As our hands joined and the handshakes followed, I felt like I could actually see the strings being retied. I still miss Codenim, but I have to say, Codenim's death was a beautiful death. In his final days, he was able to admit his every sin, and he was offered forgiveness. It may not have cleared his body of what it was that killed him, but it cleansed his soul. He died at peace. And the hole he left in our world was filled with gifts, kindness, and goodwill.
Go, 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 go.